The United States has entered a strategic crossroads, confronting escalating nuclear rivalry with peer competitors on one front and a deepening security crisis in Africa on another. Two seemingly distinct theatres of concern are converging, and as former four-star U.S. Army General Jack Keane emphasises, the stakes could not be higher. Russia and China is testing. They don't talk about it, he said. He elaborates a couple of things. It's been rumoured for years Russia and China have been testing nuclear weapons. Our intelligence services know the answer to that question. I don't ask questions like that, so I obviously don't know. I think that's what he is referring to here. That sentence, not simply speculation, but a clear assertion, signals what he believes is one element behind current US policy. Keane points out that the United States is undergoing a replacement of its own nuclear arsenal. While there is no plans that I'm aware of, except for what the president is saying here, to test the explosive side of the nuclear weapon. We test the subcritical systems routinely, and given we have new weapons, we'll test the subsystems for sure. In short, the US FANGs may not intend an above-ground full-yield test, but the infrastructure of deterrence is in motion. Keane situates all of this in a wider strategic posture. He argues that one of the motivating factors is the conduct of Russian President Vladimir Putin, whose public threats of nuclear escalation in the context of the war in Ukraine have weighed on US decision-making. One of the things that is operating here, possibly, is the president is taking a stand, with Putin always brandishing and threatening the use of nuclear escalation in Ukraine. He wasn't testing the nuclear piece of it, but the delivery system. Keane is referring to recent Russian announcements involving a nuclear-armed underwater drone and a WOC nuclear-powered cruise missile. Although these systems may not yet carry a warhead in testing, their existence marks a shift in the strategic calculus, the effect of those threats on US policy has been profound. It is always threatening. If you do X, I'll elevate and possibly use a nuclear weapon. That paralyzed the Biden administration, to be quite frank about it. We delayed tanks being brought into the country and delayed attack thems and F-16 seconds. All of that protracted the war. In his view, the potency of potential nuclear escalation has induced hesitation and expensive cost in a conflict where speed and resolution matter. He then adds, so I think that's another thing in the background here for the president, he is not going to submit to that kind of threats. I believe he believes, like most of us do, those are hollow threats being made by Putin to intimidate and coerce us into behavior that he favors. That is a significant statement, the US president in. Keane's view is drawing a line. We will not be coerced, signals Keane. The implication, the US is transitioning from reactive posture to a more assertive deterrent edge. The nuclear dimension, not simply in the realm of war games and abstract arms control, but in the context of lived crises, coercive messaging and blurred thresholds. If Russia and China are quietly testing or developing novel delivery systems, then conventional stabilizing assumptions such as there will be time for diplomacy or nuclear weapons remain tools of last resort may no longer hold. Keane believes the US must act decisively, not because it wants war, but because deterrence must remain credible in a changed environment. Turning now to Africa, Keane shifts gears, yet the logic remains similar. A major power, in this case the US, must decide whether to act, when, how, and under what conditions. Here, the country in question is Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and a key strategic actor on the continent. He notes a lot of things. They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria, and they have other countries very bad also. You know that.
That part of the world very bad. They are killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers.
We won't allow that to happen. When asked whether the United States should step in militarily, he offers caution. I really don't know. A couple of things our audience to understand. The instability in Nigeria is real. That is the core truth. Nigeria's instability is tangible, entrenched and multifaceted. With a population of roughly 237 million, vast oil and energy resources, and a government long plagued by corruption and capacity constraints, the country is far from a simple partner. Keane notes that the US already has an arms deal with Nigeria worth over $300 million, directed at helping the government train and equip for internal security missions. But he stresses it's all not a particularly effective government. Major corruption issues, and they have an insurgency led by Boko Haram. The Islamic State has presence there. Christians are certainly being killed. Over 40-some thousand, but so are Muslims. Over 25,000 Muslims killed as a result of this insurgency. That balanced statistic is crucial. While the US narrative, driven in part by militant Christian persecution, claims cast the violence in religious terms, Keane acknowledges the broader reality. Both Christians and Muslims are victims. Analysts in Nigeria have made the same point. The violence is more a function of geography, resources and insurgency than purely sectarian targeting. We have a lot of experience with them, and they are complicated issues, to be sure. This insurgency has been there raging since 2009. It won't go away overnight. This would take some major effort to put that insurgency down, as you have seen us do in Iraq, as well as in Afghanistan. The challenges associated with this, to be sure. And then he returns to the US decision point. What can we do to help? That government has got to be the question that's realistic. And how effective will it be? Are we just throwing money away? Objective assessment of where we stand and what's realistic is needed here. In effect, Keane urges restraint, not because he opposes action, but because he believes action without realism, without clear objectives and without competent local partners will risk waste or worse. The US, he suggests, must ask, what is the achievable outcome? How long will it take? How much will it cost in blood and treasure? These are questions he believes have been overlooked in previous campaigns. These remarks come against the backdrop of new and dramatic US policy language. Within days, the US president warned that American aid to Nigeria could be cut and that the US military might be deployed if Nigeria failed to stop the killing of Christians. In response, the Nigerian government rejected the characterization of a targeted Christian genocide, pointed out that Muslims are also major victims, and asserted its sovereignty. What emerges from Keane's two-front analysis is a unified logic of geostrategic realism. When great power competition meets fragile states, the risk equation changes. The US cannot indefinitely defer decisions. It must assess capability, intent, cost, risk, and outcome. Let us consider the nuclear dimension more closely. Russia and China share what many analysts describe as a near alliance of convenience, combining strategic competition with the US with military technical collaboration. Keane has warned that this partnership may be the most significant geopolitical shift of recent years. For Washington, the core concern is this: if adversaries believe the US will not respond or respond too slowly, then they might gamble that the nuclear threshold is flexible, that redundancy and counterforce options can be tested. The announcements by Moscow of delivery system tests, such as the underwater drone coded Poseidon and the nuclear-powered cruise missile, illustrate that the deterrence assumptions of the post-Cold War era are under pressure. Keane's point: if the US allows the adversary to set the pace, bluff or escalate without credible pushback, then deterrence weakens. Accordingly, replacing the US nuclear arsenal not simply in numbers but in credibility, reliability, survivability and command and control is not an optional extra. It is the core of strategic posture. His advice to the president: do not allow coercion, do not allow signaling to degrade your position. On the Africa front, the logic is different, but the pattern similar. The US has interest stabilizing Nigeria, both for regional security and because it is a major oil producer, denying safe havens to extremist groups, protecting minority populations. Yet the US also faces the reality of limited leverage. Nigeria's sovereignty, entrenched corruption, long-running insurgencies and weak governance mean that any intervention carries risk of failure or blowback. Keane warns this is not Iraq or Afghanistan. The timelines may be longer, the commitment deeper, the local partner weaker. He also warns against simplistic framings. The narrative of Christians being uniquely targeted in Nigeria appeals to parts of the US political coalition, but it risks misdiagnosing the problem. If the violence is driven by insurgency, rural-urban tension, herder-farmer conflict, local resource politics, and weak state imposition of rule, then religious bias isn't the full story. Analysts agree. Thus, Keane's prescription: first, realistic assessment; second, strong partner government; third, clearly defined objective; fourth, recognition of time and cost. And what does this mean for the US moving forward in the nuclear dimension? One consequence may be more overt signaling, subcritical tests, modernization of delivery systems, clear public articulation of thresholds, alliances strengthened. Keane's comment suggests the US will not acquiesce to opaque development of adversary capabilities, whether in Russia's Arctic Pacific drone ventures or China's expanding silo fields. And he points out the world is more dangerous now because the traditional separation of conventional war and nuclear war is eroding. In the Nigeria case, the US may deepen its security assistance, expand intelligence cooperation, support Nigerian military training, and condition aid on performance. But Keane warns, without realistic metrics and governance reform, deeper involvement risks resource drain, reputational blowback, or even strategic entanglement. From a broader vantage point, the two streams intersect. Great powers are contesting space, arms, influence, and norms. At the same time, regions like Africa become arenas of both influence competition and internal instability. The US cannot treat them as separate, blindsided issues. They feed into one another. Weak states can become arenas for great power competition, and nuclear postures can affect conventional conflict decisions. Let us summarize by returning to some of Keane's exact phrases. On nuclear deterrence, we will not submit to that kind of threats. On Africa and Nigeria, objective assessment of where we stand and what's realistic is needed here. These two lines may seem unconnected, but in Keane's presentation, they follow the same logic. Determine your capacities, clarify your red lines, define your partners, avoid bluff, act with credibility. What does this mean for US policy and for global watchers? A more assertive nuclear posture may emerge. The US may conduct public tests of subsystem elements, reaffirm involvement in nuclear allied security commitments, signal that it sees adversary delivery system development as taboo. US aid and military support to weak states may come with higher conditionality, with an emphasis on measurable outcomes rather than open-ended commitments. The threshold for US intervention may shift, where once the US shied away from being drawn into protracted internal wars, the presence of strategic linkages, nuclear competition, peer adversary interest, vital resources may tilt the decision calculus toward earlier but more calibrated involvement. For states like Nigeria, the message is, if you want US 7 to help, you must discipline security forces, improve governance, partner credibly, and show results. If you cannot, you might face cuts or conditionality rather than open-ended support. For Russia and China, the message is the US believes deterrence remains viable, that it will modernize and act. Covert testing and system deployment may not go unnoticed, and escalation via delivery systems will carry political consequences. Great power competition is accelerating. Insurrection and interstate instability are deepening, and the seams between nuclear threats and conventional conflict are becoming less distinct. Keane's remarks remind us that even when the theatre is far away, underwater drones in the Arctic, insurgents in Nigeria, the logic of strategy is the same. Credibility, capacity, clarity, and partnership matter. The script he delivered is not one of doom, but of urgency. The choices before the US are real. Deter decisively or risk being deterred. Engage selectively or remain disengaged. Partner smartly or pursue costly entanglements. As Keane put it, what can we do to help? That government has got to be the question that's realistic. Are we just throwing money away? And when it comes to the nuclear front, he reminds the era of what we hope is under the radar might be over. The world is watching. The United States is recalibrating. It is both the weapon system and the foreign policy instrument. And as these two domains show from the Arctic seas to Nigeria's northeast. The US decision makers are being forced into full spectrum thinking. The key will be whether the strategy follows the clarity of Keane's analysis or the ambiguity of yesterday's planning.